With defined contribution pensions now being subject to inheritance tax, is now the time to start planning to die with zero, like the popular book says, and really try to avoid giving the tax man 40% of your wealth when you die. And should we show the government that the Laffer curve does exist and there's times when you put up the tax rate, but actually the revenue you get declines because people are so up in arms about the tax that they do whatever they can to avoid paying it. We used to have quite an easy way of looking at the order of drawdown of assets in retirement, where you just take from your pension last because that doesn't have any inheritance tax. And so it's all quite easy to manage your money. But now we need to get into new ways of thinking, and that's what I'm going to explore in this video. The core message of Die with Zero is that if you die with a huge amount of money in your bank account, then you've wasted a lot of your life working and it's all been for nothing. The book also advocates doing things earlier than you might normally have planned, because you'll get much more enjoyment out of doing things now rather than keep putting things off. And there's no point in just accumulating more and more money. You need to find your purpose in life and focus on that. So clearly people worry about running out of money in later life because we don't know how long we're going to live and we don't know how much maybe things are going to cost in the future. And it is possible to overcome this objection with some useful planning. I covered how inheritance tax works in an earlier video, and I'll include a link to it in the description. So here's a schematic for someone's retirement if the aim is to minimize inheritance tax. So what they're doing is, in later life, they're buying an annuity, so they're converting wealth into an index-linked income, and then that way they're reducing their potential inheritance tax bill. And then also with their property, they're doing equity release when they're a bit older, and then that could potentially pay for care home costs. And when they retire, they could do some part-time work, or they could monetize a hobby or a passion. Then they could draw down from a pension or maybe initially an ISA in the early years. So there's quite a lot of flexibility. There's quite a lot of different things going on in these phases of retirement. And it's with careful planning that I think they can potentially run down some of their assets subject to inheritance tax and really enjoy life. So for some people, believe it or not, their nominal wealth actually increases even though they're retired, because if they get a good sequence of returns on their investments, then it is possible their wealth could still go up even though they're spending 4 or maybe even 5% of their wealth each year. So you really need to put together a plan to avoid this happening to you so that you can spend the money early and really enjoy life. So for their wealth, they end up with a glide path which peaks when they retire, and then they run it down over time towards the inheritance tax limit, and that amount has been frozen, I think, for about 15 years now. So the outlook for that in the future isn't too good. And the idea is that if their wealth is above the glide path, they can either give some of it away to their dependents, they can spend it on maybe some of the goals, tick off some things on the bucket list that they have, or they could bank the money in terms of maybe short-term government bonds or money market funds or a high interest cash account, so they've got a bigger rainy day fund. And then if they're below the glide path, they just need to ease off on their expenditure, which is outlined in things like Gate and guardrails. And so long as they have some discretionary expenditure within their budget, they can easily defer things for a year or two and hopefully get them back towards this glide path. Here's a fulfillment curve where we exchange our time for money to afford initially survival needs, then comforts, and then luxuries. And the idea is that at the top of the curve, we've got enough. And if we carry on trading our time for money, we end up with worse situation in terms of our overall happiness, because it's simply not worth working and paying taxes just to buy another pair of shoes or a second car or all kinds of tat for the home that we really don't need. And what you need instead is a plan for the goals and what you want to achieve in your life. And then if you focus on that instead of just focusing on randomly accruing money, then you'll live a much more satisfied life. So one objection to the book Die with Zero is, well, what about your dependents if there's not going to be much money left for them? And the book states that you're much better off giving money to your dependents in phases while you're still alive, or certainly within 7 years of your death, although clearly you don't know when you're going to die, but you give money to them over time. They see this money compounding when it's invested, and then they get keen on also investing themselves. So you could put money into a pension for them for their later life, or into an ISA for them so that they could save towards something like a deposit on a house. And then the other objection is, well, what about care home costs? And the problem here is that, well, we just don't know how long we might end up spending in a care home. I think the average is less than a year. One potential solution here would be equity release on your property, and then that can be used to fund care home costs. And there is a complication if you're in a couple and one of you needs to go into a care home and the other one doesn't, and then you might sell your large main residence and maybe buy a small flat, and then one of you goes into the care home near to that flat. So there are ways around it so that you can practically run down some of your money and really enjoy life. So one interesting thing to note is that financial advisors don't like you spending your money, because then their 1% cut is being reduced over time. And some financial advisors will kick you out as a client if your wealth falls below a certain limit. And what they can do on occasions is put too much emphasis on the probability of running out of money. And they keep seeming to emphasize some of the worst case scenarios that have happened in the past, such as retiring in 1915 and then living through the Great Depression and 2 world wars, when in reality that's probably not going to happen in the future. And people can vary their expenditure quite easily over time as their wealth fluctuates. So you can do all your wealth planning, tax optimization, and retirement planning with a spreadsheet such as my retirement calculator. And unlike a web-based service, it's not a black box and you can fully customize it yourself. And unlike using a wealth planner, I'm not going to charge you £1,500 and then give you a PDF at the end of it all that's pretty soon out of date. I think this really is a useful way to set some goals in life, lower taxes, and really enjoy yourself. If you're interested in my retirement calculator, go to my website, ianshadrack.com, or alternatively, if you want some more useful information, watch this next video.